Whether handling a firearm or speaking his mind, today's guest has a reputation for being a straight shooter. He's an accomplished author. He's been a guide and outfitter. He's produced his own radio talk show, and you've probably read his weekly column in the outdoor section of the Great Falls Tribune. Who am I talking about? Stay tuned and find out. Hi, from Montana State University, Great Falls College of Technology, I'm Larry Vaccaro, and I want to welcome you to Scene on Great Falls. Today's guest is Roland Cheek. Roland is here to talk a little bit about himself. He has a great deal of outdoor experience as a guide and outfitter. He's also going to talk about some of the books that he's written, and will share some of his thoughts with any prospective writers that we may have viewing the show today. And finally, he's going to wrap up by sharing his thoughts on hunting, in particular, on the future of hunting in Montana. Let's welcome Roland. Roland, thank you very much for being my guest.
Well, thank you, Larry, for inviting me, and it's a distinct pleasure for me to be here.
Now, you drove in from Columbia Falls, where you live.
Right. Yes, last night, as a matter of fact, and I'm a little disturbed about the weather you've invited in for me, but we'll make it. This keeps out the riffraff.
Yeah, I think it was actually Kevin Manthey that got the snow, the bad weather, just at this time of the week. Now, you were heading down to Billings for is it the Moore Show?
Yeah, it's a Montana Outdoor Recreation Exposition. Moore Show. I've been asked to speak at that show. I give a couple of seminars.
Okay, what will your seminars be on?
One of them is on elk and whitetail, the same game.
Elk and whitetail.
And the other is about watching grizzly bears safely.
Now, your article for the Tribune is called "Wild Trails and Tall Tales." Does that kind of capture what you're all about?
Well, I hope not. I think maybe some people call it tall trails and wild tales. Yeah, but it certainly has been it's been a mainstay in my opinions and my feel for Montana for 20 years now. May 10th, that column will be in business 20 years.
20 years. Now, the Great Falls Tribune isn't the only newspaper that carries it.
No.
It's carried a lot of other places as well.
Right. It's carried in Whitefish and Thompson Falls, Laurel, Shelby. It has been in Lewistown, and it's widely carried. Yeah. You said you had a daughter, I think, in Laurel.
Yes, I do.
They carry the column in the Laurel Outlook.
Yeah, she asked me for a copy of Chocolate Legs, which we're going to show here in a little bit, and she was really tickled that I told her about it and told her I was going to be interviewing you. Let's learn a little bit more about you, Roland. Are you a native of Montana?
No, I probably never will be. I've only lived here for 38 years.
That's
I've lived in the same house for 38 years, but yeah, I'm proud to call myself a Montanan, and I'm sure I'll die here. My wife and I were kids next door growing up in southwestern Oregon back in the early 50s. We married 47 years ago and came to Montana in 64.
Yeah, now your wife Jane is with you here today, and actually she's viewing the show from the control room. She's also been your outdoor companion too, hasn't she?
Oh, yes. In fact, I carry a plaque with me that I'm going to set up there in Billings, and the plaque says, "Do you want to talk to the man in charge or to the woman who knows what's going on?"
Well, knows what's going on.
So she knows what's going on and has been. We travel in packs, Larry. She's my pack mate.
Yeah. Now, how did you get your start as a guide and outfitter? Is that something that you've been involved with your whole life, or did you start that when you came here?
I could be trite and say it's like Topsy. It came about like Topsy, but it didn't. It came about because I had this burning desire for outdoors adventure, and golly, I was spending all my vacation time and all my 3-day weekends, some 2-day weekends, in outdoors adventure, and it wasn't enough.
Yeah.
So I finally reached a point in my evolution as an outdoors person that I thought I wanted to share this with others, and fortunately I was able to do that at that point in time, and I began outfitting, guiding in the Bob Marshall, and continued to do that for 21 years. And I've been very, very fortunate in that I haven't done anything except what I want to do for the last 35 years. So
that's great.
I think maybe I'm probably just, it's more than luck. Luck is a circumstance that happens whenever proper preparation meets opportunity. And so I had a lot of luck, but it's a lot of design too.
Yeah. Now you got to do a lot of the things that you like to do, and then you started a career in writing about the outdoors, and that blossomed into some other things, including your first novel, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But how did you get started in writing for publication?
I had a friend in Oregon, and when we moved from Oregon in 1964, I used to write him about some of the adventures I was going on in Montana. And he said, you know, you ought to try selling these to Outdoor Life, and which I thought at the time was absurd. And I just continued to write letters and write him, and then 1979 I had an idea that I would write a column or a story about how an outfitter would schedule a trip with an outfitter, trying to give a little insight into some of the techniques that might help other people. And we did. I wrote the article, and Field and Stream wanted to see it, and they sent it right back. And I had occasion, the editor that rejected that in 1979, I had occasion to take him on a float trip in 1988. And of course he had no recollection of any of this. We were going down a river and he was casting, and I said, you know, Jack, you have the distinction of being the first person ever to reject a magazine piece of mine. And there was just a moment's hesitation in the cast, and he said, was it any good? And I said, you know, I looked at it before we came on this trip, and it's a piece of garbage. And he said, well, see, that'll tell you. So it did. And the actual desire to become a writer and the development as a writer are two distinctly different things. You can never, if you're going to be a successful writer, you can never, ever let up on perfecting your craft. And if you want to get right to the guts of the success as a writer, you'll stick right with that one facet, perfect your craft. I've still got a long ways to go. I still read other, read books or pieces by other writers, and I'm sick with envy because I can't do that well. I want to, and you just gotta keep working at that the rest of your life. It's a lifetime job. Probably.
Yeah. Now you've written I think hundreds of articles for publication, and now you've got as we were talking about earlier, 7 books. But we're going to talk about those books just here in just a moment. But I want to remind our viewers, if you have a question for Roland, give us a call, 761-8123. Roland will be happy to answer your questions. Now I've got just a few of the books that you've written, and I think one that my son, that I got from my son, he showed me, was the Bob Marshall Wilderness, and I'm taking it that you spent a lot of time out in that part of the country.
Yeah, I sure did. In fact, that's the first book about the Bob Marshall Wilderness. I wrote that in 1982. Photographs, many of them were taken before that, prior to that. But that book sold well. We sold 17,000 copies of that book, and it was a good book for us. Coffee table book, full of photos, color photos, but much different than these other books.
Yeah, I glanced through it. And you have some beautiful photos in there. Now, learning to talk bear. We were chatting earlier, and we were talking about Mike Madel, the grizzly management biologist for this region. And you said that Mike was actually featured in or talked about in your book, mentioned in your book.
In fact, he's pictured in that book.
Oh, it's okay. And now, what about Chocolate Legs? This is a story. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Chocolate Legs is was a bear up in Glacier Park that led a long and colorful life, and there's an awful lot of detail known about that bear. They had radio collars on her for 5 years out of her, I think 16 or 17 years of her life. So there's a lot of information on that bear. And she was darted and transported into a remote region in Glacier Park because she had lost her fear of humans. And they were afraid that she would be probably lose her own life due to the familiarity with humans or hurt someone. And she was on a one-way track, so they darted her and moved her. And she was 10 years, she was off the radar, although they tracked her for 3 years before she lost her radio collar. So they know she stayed in that general area, in that remote region. And then she was off radar for 10 years, and then suddenly she surfaced at 2 Medicine, and up to her old familiarity with humans tricks again, and a hiker disappeared on a mountain that she was known to be on, and they had a radio collar on her again by then, and they never found any sign of that hiker. And the next year, another hiker disappeared, and they found his remains and traced her through DNA samples, her and her two-year-old cubs, to having fed on the other hiker, the human. So, of course, she lost her life. There are some extenuating questions that's raised in that book, I think, about whether she was actually the bear that killed a human, or and if she went wrong, why did she go wrong? And probably more to the point, what should be more to the point is, what are we going to do to prevent a bear like that from happening again? Those kind of circumstances. So it was an intriguing story, and one that actually it's a story that ran in the New York Times about that bear at the period, and of course in all the newspapers in Montana, Associated Press.
Now your most recent book, and I believe you explained it to me as your first novel, is The Echoes of Vengeance. And I've started reading this. I've got about, probably about two-thirds of the way through. It's a very interesting book. I always enjoyed reading Louis L'Amour stories, and this has a lot of the flavor. Louis was really good at capturing the flavor of the time and of the people, and I think you've really done that very well in your story here. Would you like to tell our viewers a little bit about this book, about the storyline?
Well, every novel, every piece of fiction really starts with character and circumstance. You have to have a character, and you have to have a certain circumstance. Then from there on out, it's just simply a question of what if. The protagonist, the character that I used, is an 18-year-old lad who's of mixed blood. Is a mountain man father and a Blackfeet mother, and they gave him up to the Methodist orphanage or Methodist school to try to prepare him for the enormous social changes that was taking place in the land. And so he's 18 years old, trying to make his own way, and his parents are brutally murdered in an Indian massacre, and that's the circumstance. Now, what if? What if he wanted to exact revenge on the perpetrator of the killing of his parents? Would he? Yes. The answer to that is yes. Anybody would want to. How many would? So that's the next question. Would this young lad have actually followed through? Then, if so, what would he do? He'd have to flee. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yep.
You build a bunch of what ifs into a story, and I think every piece of fiction is based on that very thing. Caine Mutiny was based on the commander of a destroyer in the South Pacific that was going bonkers, and it was a what if. What would he do, or what would his executive officer and his others of the ship's officers do? What would they do? Pulitzer Prize winner, and I'm not sure you can base your characters and your circumstances on fact or fiction, but from there on out you have to employ those what ifs. And this young man goes through life, his entire life, of course, followed by the echoes of his vengeance, and you can say, would he has this enormous cloud hanging over him. What about love, wanting to love, or make friends, or make roots, establish roots? All of these things are affected by the echoes of that vengeance. And what if? What if he establishes love? It's going to be ruptured somewhere, and how? So I have fun.
Well, and hopefully our viewers will get a chance to read that. Of all the books that you've written, which is your favorite?
My favorite is Dance on the Wild Side. Dance on the Wild Side is the story of our life, my wife and I. And it has so much going for it because we have, we've led a very adventurous life. We were kids next door growing up back in the early 50s, and we did everything wrong. We married too young. We had children too soon. And we thrived in spite of it because we became a team. And so rising against adversity, we've had a lot of that too. And yet, I told you earlier, I think, Larry, that I haven't done anything except what I want to do for the last 35 years. And is that luck? No, it's not luck. It's by design. But that's all portrayed in that book. It's a self-help book. It's an adventure book. It's just got a lot of things going for it.
Well, Roland, you're a very highly experienced at writing for publication. And if we have some of our viewers that might be interested in doing this sort of thing, what advice would you have for them?
Well, I don't really know. I can tell you how I did it. I started writing for a weekly newspaper. And everybody, in order to perfect their craft, they have to have a means, a vehicle for analyzing their own work. You can't do it. I can't analyze my own work. I write 5 columns a month, and the newspaper only carries 4 of them in most months. So now, which ones don't they use? Okay, then why don't they use this? I've got a vehicle for double checking my own work. I would advise anybody to try to write a weekly column, and then I would advise them never to ever assume that they they know all they need to know, no matter how successful they are as a writer or think they're becoming as a writer. I thought I could make it professionally as a writer in 1990, whenever I retired from the outfitting business. And I found out it was a lot tougher than I thought. Even though I had all the contacts in place, I was doing a regular column. I had written for all the national magazines, outdoor magazines, Outdoor Life, Field and Stream, and I still couldn't make a living at it. And finally, I just decided, well, if I'm not going to make a living writing what someone else wants me to write, why don't I write what I want to write? And I still, if I don't make a living, I'm no worse off. So I started writing books. Learning to Talk Bear was the first of the books that we self-published ourselves, Jane and I, and it's been very successful. Probably the most successful of all of the books to this point.
Okay. So we've talked about a little bit about your background. We've talked about your career as a writer. Let's talk now about the outdoors and hunting in particular. Now, you were a guide and outfitter, and I'm assuming that you took people on pack trips that were not strictly hunting trips. But what meaning does hunting have for you? What personal meaning?
Gee, it took me to the outdoor dance. I don't think I would have become as successful in the outdoors had it not been for hunting. The only proviso that I would put with that is, if there are people who only hunt for the kill or the success of it, without realizing that there are frost on spider webs, that there's the leaves turning in the fall. I finally got to the point that hunting was very, very important, but shooting something was very, pretty small potatoes with me. I still have to stand on a ridge on a fall morning and pound my chest, and that may be one reason, one of the best reasons for hunting, is it gets people who are sedentary in their desk bound, maybe not like perhaps like Great Falls College instructors who can get out in the fall and spend some time outdoors and maybe lose a little weight. I used to tell people, women whose husbands came hunting with me, I'd tell them that you sent out a boy, but you're getting home a man. And that may sound trite, but there's some truth in it. That the 10 days that they spend on a demanding pack trip or hunting trip was probably paid dividends in their longevity and in the quality of their life that they lead. But all of those are only part of the reasons for hunting.
Well, you've been an outfitter, or you were a guide and outfitter for quite a while. How has hunting changed since you first got into the guiding and outfitting business? Where's it at today in relation to where it was?
Well, I can tell you that when I was born in 1935, there was 140 million people in the United States. Now there's 280. And every change that takes place, whether it's in hunting or whether it's in homes that are being built in wildlife habitat, all can be traced back to that one thing, that there's twice as many of us. So the changes can, that's the root cause of the changes. It's, when I first started hunting, we never even used to go ask our neighbors if we could go hunting on their place. It was just a given that we did or could. And then it got to the point, well, common courtesy demands that you ask. Now it's to the point where I can't imagine hunting on public land, national forest, or
Mm-hmm.
BLM land. Or, I know there's lots of opportunities that lie on private land, but it's not worth the hassle to me.
Well, just about 4 minutes left in our show. And I'd like to get you to reminisce just a little bit, and I've got a couple of questions for you. Who's your favorite all-time hunting partner?
My favorite all-time hunting partner?
Uh-huh.
Probably my Brittany Spaniel Hunter.
So you enjoy hunting birds?
Well, I
Birds
did,
also.
yeah, sure. I had the world's greatest dog, I had the world's greatest horse, got the world's greatest wife. All of those are partners. It's hard to get a group of individuals together that are compatible, that enjoy hunting, and frankly, I had that group. There was 4 of us in Oregon before I left there in 1964, and I never was able to find a group of 4 individuals that would fit that same bill. I had many times with hunted with 2 other people, and it was wonderful. They were great people. My all-time greatest hunting partner, wouldn't that be? I'll tell you one thing, he'd have been a fine fella.
Now, does Jane hunt?
Yes, she hunts birds. She had her own bird dog, and her bird dog was a fine Brittany Spaniel too.
What's it like to be out in the field with her?
With Jane?
With Jane, yeah.
She's probably the most knowledgeable individual. When we go into the Bob Marshall and we pull into a campsite to set up camp, it's like a clockwork, a team that setting up tent, setting up a dining fly, taking care of the horses, gathering wood. Of course, we've been together for so long now that we don't even have to talk. We just follow a regular routine and pattern, and that's kind of comforting as you grow older in life. I'm 67 years old now, and probably have spent half my life. You know, I probably don't have over another 40, 50 years, and so you grow kind of comfortable with that kind of routine.
Yeah. Roland, we've got about 1 minute left in our show, and if you could give us real quickly, what advice would you have for people today, based on your own? Yeah.
Same advice that I imagine that Jesus Christ had in 2,000 years ago: do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and I think you have to live with honor and accept responsibility. That's sort of in short supply in this day and time. But yeah.
And so, unfortunately, we're out of time, Roland. I want to thank you for being my guest today. I've been a pleasure to interview you. For our guests, catch Roland's column in the Great Falls Tribune, or even better yet, read one of his books. For Montana State University, Great Falls College of Technology, I'm Larry Vaquero. Happy trails to you. Hope to see you again next week.